Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography in Akron, Ohio. This podcast was recorded as an ongoing documentation practice with NCCAkron visiting artists in 2024 and 2025. In this episode, NCCAkron's Executive Artistic Director, Christy Bolingbroke, enters the studio with Minneapolis, Minnesota-based Leila and Noelle Awadallah of Body Watani. As daughters of Palestinian refugee lineage, Body Watani investigates dance rooted in Arab and SWANA movement languages. Their first evening-length work, TERRANEA, was performed at the Arab American National Museum, Hammana Artist House, Red Eye Theater, Lynx Hall, and Madina Theater.
So my first question is for each of you, how or when did you know you wanted to be a choreographer?
Leila speaking. When I was in my undergrad at the University of Minnesota, we had composition classes, and I just found a deep fascination in shaping momentum and metaphor and story. And at the time, I was also doing a minor in Arabic language and literature. So I got really interested in taking, what I was learning in that department, partly Arabic language as a calligraphy and choreographic shape and tool, and then partly the content of Palestinian literature and Arab American literature, and taking those strong imageries and making choreography with that. And I, in my time in undergrad, found it as a really clear path towards expressing all the things that were moving through my body. After I graduated, I felt pretty certain that I wanted to keep doing that. And I, at that time, didn't see a company or a project that was working with Arabic folk dances or content or politics in the way that I really wanted to embody and perform. So it was also like, okay, I don't see anyone around me doing this, so let me do this. And it started very much as a solo practice because I didn't have any resources. So I feel like I spent years choreographing solos on myself until I started to get a little more opportunities and resources. And then that's when I often was inviting in Noelle to come be a dancer in my choreography and other artists in my community. And it just grew kind of naturally.
That resonates with so much of how I think about those solo explorations, the image out in the sand or during the pandemic, certainly the carving out of the calligraphy that you were showing in your body. And I appreciate, too, you reminding me dancers and choreographers are not just dancers and choreographers. And so being able to consider the syntax of Arabic literature as well as the syntax of dance making. You've dropped another little nugget there for me to hold on to. But for you, Noelle, because this has become somewhat of a family business, was it a foregone conclusion or did you have your own moment?
It wasn't till more recently that I kind of started claiming the title choreographer. In this college I went to in Columbia College, Chicago, I was really immersed in like improvisational practices. And so to claim improviser felt more comfortable because I was also, I think, and still am, rather than finding the right movement, more interested in like spatial, energetic, narrative space making. So it felt like an improvisation like offered me that, where there was more openness rather than in choreography where I feel like it's more shaped. So yeah, I think more recently did I start being like, okay, I am a choreographer because I am making dance and making moves.
Yeah.
But I think improviser and choreographer sit together for me. And I want to let them be like exchangeable. Like they both have information inside of each other.
Mm-hmm. They're different tools, different practices. And I love just hearing from each of you how you each bring a different perspective that maybe not always is visible in the finished product. But I know one of your shared perspectives is the idea of Body Watani as a research container for your movement making. Can you talk some more about that and how that container maybe is a starting place with an idea?
I think it comes beautifully from what Noelle was even just saying, and I'll come back to that. But like Badi Watani, Watani means my homeland in Arabic. And so we started to think about how can we make dance that doesn't bind us or bound us too much to a certain, like, this is contemporary dance, this is modern dance, this is Arabic dance, whatever. Like, how do we actually rewind and say, my body is my homeland? And if that is true, then all of my teachers are here in this land, and all of my ancestors are here. And our desire to connect with Palestine through folk dance is just as strong of a choreographic and creative presence as is my previous job as a scuba diver and Noelle's work as a farmer. Like, all of it can be empowered to swirl together and hold our work and our research. And that also holds, our teachers and our mentors in ways where we're sifting through, like, okay, where's my body in all of this? And we call it a research container because for us, it's very much about learning, or rather than like making movement, finding the movement and finding the form that trickles out and that reveals itself through improvisation, through folk dance study, through, conceptual and durational investigation. And when we hold that container, it is through a Palestinian diasporic lens. But we also named it Badi Watani as an invitation to be like, just because, this is my Badi Watani and this is how I lead this, another collaborator can walk in the room and say, well, my Badi Watani is saying this. And like, maybe they're not, a Palestinian or Arab lineage, and Watani, the Arabic language, does set a context. But like one of our previous works, there's like Sharita, who has roots to Uganda, and Erica Joe with Mexico, and Nikita with Lebanon. And we don't like bound people by land and nation, but those cultural stories, those lineages come into the room. And something that Badi Watani really holds is like the mixed bodies, the diasporic bodies, the refugee bodies, the people who homeland, the idea of homeland is charged. And I think there's something different between home and homeland. Like I have heard a lot of dance talk about like, oh, body home. And I think that's interesting. But in the Palestinian reality, homeland is more about what we're thinking about, like the land itself, the people, the place. For some, that might be, a luxury that we have a land that's clear to us, that we know we are sourcing from and we know we are rooted to. But then in another way, it's like, you could open that up a lot of directions of what it means to be in relationship to Palestinian land right now and for the past 75 years and the future.
So poetically and beautifully put, both from your personal experience, but that invitation that you also talked about is extended, right? The idea of any sort of land, ownership, displacement, these are also, I think, charged experiences that inform people's relationship to sense of place, community, wealth, belonging, regardless what their own lived backstory and ancestral history is too. And this is one of the reasons that I think we talked about in our process, like the privilege of getting to work with artists like yourself, because you are helping us process the world that we all live in. because these are very complex issues and considerations too.
They're complex and they're urgent, but they're also very simple because ultimately we have settler colonialism and we have indigenous resistance. And we've seen that story play out over and over, even in the modern day United States, where you have like people doing their land acknowledgements. Like, what does it mean? What are we acknowledging, really? Like, okay, we have to face and embody the settler colonial takeover of this land, of Turtle Island, and what happened to the indigenous people and what is still happening and what kind of futures we want to be a part of. I think that Palestine, when you see it as a relative, it's different. But when you see the relative in that, it becomes very simple. That is also part of Badi Watani's invitation, is like, this is our liberation practice. Like, you can join us and you can come with us and you can weave your solidarity with us. But like, we are also disentangling and aiming to disrupt the settler colonial legacies in our bodies that are also, like, we are also born on Turtle Island. So we have settler colonial presence here too. So nobody's body is like simple and boxed in. Like, we have multiple layers of truth that we're like sifting through, and dancing is such an amazing site to do that because the body is the material.
Yeah.
So like, we have a lot of knowledge as dancers about how to disentangle from systems of violence and create paths towards liberation. And yeah, it's not as easy as it sounds, but we do have knowledge around that bodily interrogation, reclamation, all these things.
You're reminding me that dance and choreography is not just movement for movement's sake, but it can actually be a means to create a movement, right? Whether that's the practice of liberation. Understanding that practice, it's one of the reasons I think for me personally, one of the most unsatisfying conversations after a show might be when an audience is like, but what's it about? And you're like, oh, the aboutness is just, that's too confining a container. It's the how and the practices. And I got to witness some of that with your collaborators. It was a very spacious experience. What I observed were very dedicated ways of how you brought people into rehearsal, how you exited rehearsal a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about like kind of what you look for in collaborators and how you maintain those practices of the ways of working together? Noelle, do you want to start?
What I've learned from our first work together, that was TERRANEA, into After the Last Red Sky, and all the in-betweens, I feel like relationship is the most important thing to either have with our collaborators or build and sustain with our collaborators. So the rituals that take place in the entrance of the space and then the exit of the space feel like the holders of sustaining relationship. Also, I feel like our collaborators are people that we admire, of course, inside the work they're doing with us and outside in the world in their own work or in their own way of living or their own way of being. Most of them are dancers. Even our scenic designer, Lai Chi Yang, is also a dancer, and Jose Luis, who's our stage manager and writer, also a dancer. So I feel like there's this also point of connection that we have in the body and knowing the body and being in the body.
I'll just add, when we've worked with other dancers, because it's something, or to be dancers in the project, it's come from a lot of who shows up and lets us know they are interested. Who reaches out and says I'm interested in the work you're doing, and who comes to things. And then from there, we're like, this person wants to be here as much as, we would love to work with them. That's when we invite someone, because we've never been like, oh, let's go find the strongest dancer in this way and la la la. No, it starts with a relationship. It starts with mutual interest. And we love the very different ways people move. And the very different ways people think. So we want to work with collaborators who are going to show up with an agency, to be like, I don't think that we should do this. What about this? I mean, even our lighting designer, Tony, he just went off and lit everything and didn't ask. But then when we looked at it, we're like, yes, because we'd been talking for months, because we have worked with him in other contexts and trust his intuition. So I think actually the simplest word is intuition. There's a lot of intuition when it comes to like, what is the alchemy of the group as a whole? And will we all be able to feel right doing this work together? And do the collaborators know the stakes of this work too? Because we are, especially recently with After the Last Red Sky, I mean, it is a work being made in a real-time genocide. And we are holding that in our bodies, in our creative process, in our mind, in our hearts, everything. And not to say that our collaborators aren't, they are too, but they're many of them aren't Palestinian and they don't have family on that land. Right. And so how do you also call the people into the room to meet that urgency and that depth with you and to trust them? And we really trusted the people in that space, and we had to, because it's such a time where we need to protect ourselves and our work. The small moments of violence or frustration become really big really fast in this time period. So I think we were careful too.
You're reminding me, if NCCAkron, even as a distant collaborator, an added host and container for this process, think about all the conversations that we had, right, on a monthly basis, almost a year before we were actually in a physical space together. And hearing you reflect on that with your lighting designer and stage manager, there's intuition, but the practice of having those conversations that are maybe a little less product oriented, it's setting a shared fertile ground between you to be able to then, when you're like, great, we have 5 days in this space and we're going to have to make some big things. And who knows what else is going to be going on in the world, in people's personal responses, what else they're managing, because we're dealing with human beings. That any creative process can benefit from also foregrounding the humans and the relationships first, so that if someone did have a difficult moment, that they could say, hey, this is what's going on. And I'm here, but maybe I'm at 80% today because 20% of me has to be also feeling something else. And I feel we had some of those conversations and moments in our own dialogue as well. Speaking of intuition, though, I'm curious, whenever there's a co-artistic leadership, you have your own familial shorthand as well as creative shorthand. You know each other even more intimately. How do you open up that process or translate it to make space for other people in the creative process?
Noelle, do you have thoughts that come up for you on that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's interesting because our first work, TERRANEA, had a cast of, including us, 4 other, six, including us, 6 performers, dancers. And then we went into After the Last Red Sky, which was just Leila and I as the dancers. So I feel like we kind of did this thing backwards, where we started with choreographing and sharing on other people. And then we were like, oh, what we learned from that moment, although it was like beautiful and like thick and full, we need to go back and like just make a dance for Leila and I, so that we can practice what it means to choreograph on each other and with each other and for each other. Leila and I do have similar dance histories and also different dance histories, but it just the way and maybe it's familial, maybe it's sister, maybe, I don't know. It's our shared lineages, like
Community. Yeah.
community, like the way we
Culture.
Yeah.
Ananya Dance Theater.
Mm.
Yeah.
Shout out, you both had performed with Ananya Dance Theater, which is a whole other form. Yeah.
The way we can like transfer knowledge from our brains to our bodies, to our own bodies and to the other person's bodies. There's like, for all those reasons, it's easier.
Mm.
We are learning to spend time in the studio, just the two of us, both in process and in planning and in making, so that when we do walk into the room, we're kind of in tune with each other and our visions. And then when we're actually in the room, I feel like that's when the most visible different strengths arrive. We just set a work on Wayne State University students, which was awesome. There were days when I was like walking in like, okay, we're going to do this phrase. And then I'd get stuck and I'd do something weird and Noelle would look and be like, no, don't do that. Like, that's wrong. And then she'd kind of go in the corner and then come out with like this. And then we'd be like, yeah, that's it. So I think we lean into different strengths. And then, I'll like Noelle will lead an improvisation task and give them notes and shape it. And then I'll kind of sit and watch and be like, that person should spin. We thrive with other collaborators in the room, like in our process, because I think it helps us get out of our sister dynamic where we also live together and we also have a lot of the same friends and we do a lot.
Yeah.
So like it kind of shakes up the default energy that we can lean into. And so I really love also like when our musician Tadek comes, like he changes the whole vibe because he brings another rhythm and we're both bouncing off that.
We like the vibe to change. We're open to that. We want it to change. We want everyone to come in and shift the energy in the room, which is helpful.
What I heard was a lot of ebb and flow, and this idea that one may be moving and the other one may be still and noticing. And that's receiving information differently and only going to metabolize and turn it back out in a different way. And that, I would imagine, is a kind of instinctual choreography of who needs to step up when to work with that.
Yeah. And then that's hard when we're making a duet and we're the performers.
Right.
So that's when we bring in our friend Emma Marlar, who is a brilliant like collaborator, close friend, long-term friend, and also works dramaturgically with us. And because she knows our work so well that she can sit on the outside and be like, and bring up things that Noelle and I couldn't notice as much as we wanted to. So I think it's also like knowing when you really need help with that witness and that metabolizing, like what is going on here? Because we really value knowing it in our own embodied, sense of the work, but we still do want to care for the craft of what it means to put that on stage and what it means for people to sit and watch and their internal rhythm, which won't match ours. There's an interesting thing with dance where like the dance internal rhythm and idea of how long something should be and the outside, which everyone's on a different page anyway.
Sure. Yes.
Like trying to work more on the craft of, because sometimes we get into more of a somatic textural.
Almost meditative and.
Yeah. So then how deep, how far do you go with the consciousness of an audience in the room? And that is where we also, ask for help. Having a dramaturg in the room is so valuable for dance making. And I have not experienced it as much as I wish.
Yeah, it's still very nascent as an idea too. And any of the dramaturgs that I've met work vastly different. For better or worse, it's like there's no one way of doing it, but we still have to figure it out. I do want to focus on the physical movement, the steps, the choreography for a second, because we've talked about certainly relating to folk dancing and then your own experience inside different contemporary forms as well as improvisation. That to me is something that is very 21st century. How do you both navigate the idea of like when to go to something known like a debka to when to give yourself the space to find something that you might not even be able to put a name on yet as far as a step and the choreography itself?
What's really important about Body Watani's work is a certain amount of clarity of where are we speaking about and why, putting debka in our work, both as a folk dance practice that, we're still learning because we didn't grow up there doing debka and we haven't had access to that dance as much. So I feel like when I'm doing debka, it's like I'm both finding, I feel like we're finding our body memories culturally and ancestrally, but also we're relearning and trying to understand what debka is to us. And a lot of the previous year was using debka as a way to connect with Gaza and to send vibration to Gaza. And so we feel it's also very sacred, very much about learning and craft and rhythm. And so that like roots us to place and people. But then at the same time, we are fascinated by the spacious and undefinable terrain of what the body reveals. We were making a piece about trying to heal the sky and making gestures to like, how would we heal the sky from everything that's happened? And that brought up a lot of like playful and strange, like I felt like I was like, like screwing in a light bulb and cleaning off this light bulb of a star.
For the sky. Yeah. I love the idea of you screwing in a star in like a light bulb in the sky. That's amazing.
And it just like happened when we were improvising about how could we heal the sky. And like all these funny gestures came up and became something else. And then we'd even just totally disorient from the content and be like, okay, let's just play the yes, no game where I do a move and you say yes or no. And you have to keep just going on impulse. Like, okay, so if it's not this move, is it this move? Because I think we're also trying to like keep ourselves, like keep the possibility wide open. And then the dance, Noelle talks about this really well. Like the dance tells us what it is rather than us always telling the dance what it should be.
Maybe that's some of the improviser listening. What would you want to add, Noelle, about movement generation?
Yeah, I think like Leila said, working in the context and the stories of what we're working in, which is a very real place with Palestine, with real people and real stories and real violence happening. We're also working from a diasporic place of like, yes, the land and the people and the culture looks really clear and feels clear, but then there's also like the ancestral, the body, the memories, the unclear spaces that feel fragmented and floaty and obscured and yes and no and I don't know and maybe. And I think that's where the improvisation part really comes in, because like ancestral memories and finding things in your body and knowledge that isn't clear with words and doesn't feel useful with words, really like it does live in the body. So the only way to, I think, be with that unknown, with that fragmented part, is to generate from a place of unknown, of improvisational, with maybe a score or maybe an idea or a hope of discovery.
I'm curious if you have ever received a piece of advice or an elder, an ancestor said something to you that kind of keeps you grounded to continue doing this work? Or if you would have advice to offer yourself in your own words to anyone who's listening, who's also navigating a creative life.
With the imagination that we have access to, like, we can make our own spaces and make our own performances that aren't funded by something, and we can say yes to ourselves and yes to ourselves and yes to our own ideas and make it happen. And we don't always need someone else to say yes to us in order for us to do the thing, although it's maybe more labor, or maybe it's not. Maybe you can, there's so many ways of doing things, and I think to say yes to yourself first before waiting for someone to say yes to you is important.
Huge. I love that. And so poignant. I think always, but especially right now. Yeah. Leila, do you want to co-sign or offer a piece of advice yourself?
Totally co-signing. There's been multiple times where we were like, let's just make our own show in our backyard. Let's just go perform by the lake, Bidé Makaska. Like, we need to do something now. Like, so those are really foundational to like even getting our momentum flowing when we didn't have output. There is a very clear piece of advice that I received from a very special human, Georgiana Pickett, who passed this last year and who was assigned to me as a mentor through the Jerome Hill Fellowship.
Oh my gosh, what a gift.
I know, such an amazing person. And like every time I got on those calls, it was like a flood of so much. And one of the things she told me that I'll never forget and that I always repeat is that I was sharing with her how stressed I was. Like, I have to teach, and I always plan, for like 5 hours to teach a 1 hour class, and it doesn't make sense, but I'm so nervous. And she said, like, what's your favorite fruit? And I said, a fig. And she's like, okay, a fig doesn't, plan or prepare to taste good. It just grows that way. And because it's growing like that, it's always delicious. Like, it's always going to be delicious. And it knows what it is. And it's, I don't know, like the logic, she said it so much better, but she said, you already are all the things. You already have all the information you need. Just be a fig. Just go there and be a fig. You're already a fig. And when she said that, I was like, you're right. I'm a fig. So every time, even before I teach, when I'm getting nervous, I just say like, I'm a fig. And she left me with that, like that gift of soothing my soul that I call on every time I feel nervous.
Inside the Dancers Studio Conversation Series is produced by NCCAkron and supported in part by the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts, and Audio-Technica, a global audio manufacturer with U.S. headquarters in Northeast Ohio. Our podcast program is produced by Lisa Niedermeyer of Handmade Future Studio. Rahsaan Cruz is our audio engineer, with transcription by Arushi Singh, theme music by Flaco Torres, and cover art by Micah Kraus. Special thanks to Laura Alicott, Sarah Durham, Christy Welter, Nikisha Moore-Dunson, and Dante Fields. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancers Studio. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.